It's the weather for it today. Land of the Pharaohs from 1955 in the freaking heat. In Egypt, by the way. They recorded it in Egypt. And that is actually one of the features of this movie, is they recorded it in Egypt at the pyramids, because it's about building the pyramid, the big one. And the extras, that enormous army of Egyptians, is an army of actual army Egyptians. The flip side of that is that there are mustaches where there really, really shouldn't be. Because these Egyptians from way back when were all clean shaven, but Egyptians in 1955 who were in the army have mustaches. So you get 3 mustaches. That is, I think, maybe one of the problems with this movie is, location is wonderful. And there was this moment where they are at the bottom of a pyramid being built. And they filmed that at the bottom of a pyramid that was abandoned during building. And they cleared away some of the sand. And so they filmed it at the bottom of an actual pyramid from so many years ago. Absolutely awesome. But it's 1955 and we're having Egyptians with mustaches. And everybody is bloody overdressed. Because this is supposed to be... And the pyramids were built 2600s, the 26th century BCE is 46 centuries ago. Yeah. Literally on the other side of well, not too far away, but in England they were building the Stonehenge at this time. It's that long ago. So, Old Kingdom. And it's 1955, so people have to be properly dressed. But what it should have looked like is something like this. And I'll put in some close-ups of ladies and gentlemen. This is what it should have looked like. Simple white cotton and linen garbs. And many upper torsos that are naked, including ladies' upper torsos. This film doesn't do that. It's 1955. I don't think that's the biggest problem that this movie has. The biggest problem that this movie has, but I don't think it's a problem as such, is because it is so long ago, we don't have much information about this period. The most of the information that we have about the Egyptians is like 1,000 or 1,500 years later in the Middle and the New Kingdom. This is Old Kingdom. We know very little. We know this pyramid was built by a chap called Khufu, a pharaoh named by the name of Khufu, because they chiseled that name into a wall somewhere. We have no depictions of this guy. We have one little figurine that is attributed to Khufu. We don't know what it looked like. We hardly know who his parents were. We know a little bit about the dates of his reign, but only from later lists, and they're still trying to piece together how accurate these lists are. And if you go far enough back, you come into legendary kings that may not have lived at all. Because if your list is from like 1,000 years later, referring to stuff 1,000 years earlier, how accurate is it going to be? Only as accurate as they can make it, which is, there may be a limit to it. I mean, what do we know about stuff that happened 1,000 years ago? 1,000 years ago is just before 1066, before the Normans invaded Britain. And we don't know all that much about these.
It's literally the Dark Middle Ages.
It's the Dark Middle Ages.
We don't know anything.
And it's only 1,000 years ago, and we live in a modern age. How do you think they're going to be in 1500 BCE thinking about a period 1,000 years earlier? With also an intermediate period in between, so there was a moment of total confusion there as well. So we know very little. But all we know is that this pyramid is there because we can cheat at everything. And so we want to know, how did this happen? So there's a lot of talk about how it could be done. And this movie is trying to put that into a narrative. I think that's a good idea. We would like to know what happened, but we don't know enough to actually do like a historically really accurate. I mean, the events in this movie are completely made up because we have no events. There's a pyramid and there's a name of a guy. That's all we have. And the culture that we know about from Egyptians is information is 1,000 years later. So they solve this by having an observer group. We'll come back to the observer group in a second. Talk about there's a funeral happening because there was a battle and there's people in the battle and so deaths. So there's funeral rites, Egyptian funeral rites, explained to these observers in a very general terms, because we don't know what these Egyptians were thinking in this period. We know 1,000 years later, but we don't know this, because 1,000 years later is when they wrote down the Book of the Dead, which was they put it on the wall, so we have it pretty much complete. The Book of the Dead, the journey of the deceased person through the various by the various gods and being judged and all that. But that's then. We don't know what they were thinking in 1,000 years earlier. We have no idea. We do know that they thought burial was important, hence pyramid. It is a tomb. Everybody knows and agrees it is a tomb. These pyramids were meant to be tombs. They were also meant to be filled with offerings, as in gold and grain and all that. Of course, with Khufu's pyramid, long gone all that stuff. Probably also already when Cleopatra took Caesar on their little tour down the Nile, when she showed him around her beautiful realm. Which, by the way, is she's closer to us than she is than she is to these pyramids. So at that time already, these pyramids were long robbed out. There was nothing left. So, I mean, we have no idea what was there. So they have to make a guess of what they would have wanted to put in there. How would this funeral rite be? The thing they do, and I think that's it is made up, but I think it's a good idea, is that in other cultures, and I know this from the Chinese culture for one, and I think the Aztecs did it as well, is they had a period where they would have the ruler be buried with the entire household. The ruler dies, household is buried alive with them. This practice in all places stopped pretty quickly, because when you get like to the second or third generation, everybody sort of goes, I'm not being part of your household anymore because I end up dead and my kids end up dead. So this thing dies out pretty quickly, but it's a kind of interesting idea, and they put it in here. So when Pharaoh does die, he takes, there's a bunch of priests that are willing to be buried with him, to go with him to the afterlife. I thought it was a really good idea. I'm not going to tell you the story, because the story is largely made up. And the story is there to be a picture book version of history. It's not, the events are not the important thing. The flavor of the events are. There is a theme of, the greed of the pharaoh for getting his treasure into the afterlife, but then people around him who have greed for the treasure itself. And of course gold. Gold has always been a thing in Egypt as treasure, but as something desirable. Incidentally, with gold and greed comes Joan Collins, because of course she does. As the young lady, you have to have a young lady. Pharaohs, by the way, is played by Jack Hawkins, who I think I've only ever seen in like pirate movies and westerns and stuff like that. He's a burly dude, which I think is a great metaphor because these early pharaohs, they were warring pharaohs. They were burly people. They went out to conquer new lands and bring home goods and slaves and all that. Every little stele shows that, from Namer up to this guy. And that's also the story. Khufu wants to build his pyramid. He also wants it secure. And he has pyramid builders, but he needs more goods and more slaves, and so he goes out to fight a war. I don't think he didn't actually go out to fight a war. The war just happening. He just happens to be in it, and he brings home a group. These, on the whole, I understand in these times, what you would do as a warring pharaoh or whatever king is you go have the war, and then when you win, you make the other place pay to be released, or you actually occupy the place. I don't think he was interested in occupying. He wanted the tribute, the monies. But in this case, he also wants the fella who gave them so much trouble in that one town where there were so many traps he almost couldn't win. He only won by numbers. This fellow is smart. He says, I want this fellow to build the traps in my pyramid to keep my treasure safe. So he nabs this guy and this guy's family and a group of his people, and we have these people now. And these are the observers that I was talking about. Very interesting. So we are actually not talking about the building of the pyramids. We're talking about the traps inside the pyramids. We don't know how this worked. We still don't. They didn't know in 1955, and we still don't know how it worked. So this is all conjecture, and this is what makes this a movie and not history. This is part of conjecture. The building of the pyramid took a long time. The Wikipedia says 26 years. I'm not sure if they knew in 1955 how long it took, but of course it took a long time. They did seem to know in 1955 that the pyramid was not built by slaves, or not solely by slaves. It was built by the tribute of the local Egyptians. Your taxes in the time would have been paid by grain from your land and labor from your family. You would send somebody to do labor, which would be this pyramid. So this film already knows that and applies that. Well done. Now, the thing that is not good. These observers, this little group. In later time, in the 1500 BCE, the Ramesses time, the enemy was almost always Hittites. And they were from the modern day Syria and Palestine and Israel, that sort of region, Levant people, would be their normal enemy. And so this is the Bible stories are set roughly in this time because of that reason. However, 26 centuries BCE, those were not the enemies. The enemy, the one they were always fighting with, were the Cushites, who were south of Egypt in current day Sudan. They would have been black. And this movie, I think there are three possible reasons that are mutually exclusive why they are not black. One, practical reason. For them to be black would have been quite a big group of actors who could do lines that were black. And that might have been a problem. I don't know how much of that a problem that is, and I don't think it was the actual consideration, but I think it might have been part of it. Two, if they had been black, the story is that the group is enslaved by the pharaoh, brought back to Egypt and made to work. That's a bad look if they're black. Again, I don't know in 1955 if that would have been a main consideration, but it might have been. I think it is one now, The third reason, I think, and I think this is the one, is that this film is made by the same people who do all these peplum movies, from stationed in Rome, all Christians, and they would like to put Christianity in here, but they can't. So this group that is actually completely undefined, they don't define them as Jews or anything like that. They have just no denomination at all. But they are obviously Levant people. They're meant to be Jewish, without very clearly saying so. The film does it correctly by not stating that in any way, shape, or form. They just should have been black, but they're not. And so there you are. Actors are really good. I enjoyed that. All the names are completely made up, of course, because these people don't exist. Kush is straight south of of Egypt, and I think later Egypt actually took a good chunk of the country as well. So they would have had many black people, and they would have looked something like this here on this row. That's what they would have looked like. This person, and not the second one, but the third and fourth person in. Those would have been Kush people. So this movie is sort of a hodgepodge of what we know about history, what holes we fill in. There's a moment where the pharaoh rides a camel, and I did look it up. Camels are way later. They didn't use them in this period. Not until much later, like 500 BCE is before we started using them. It's like they're off by 2,000 years. But they're in Egypt, and camels are up the wazoo everywhere. So of course they're going to ride a camel. And I think if you have like the choice, do we organize very difficultly a horse, or we take available camel to do our scene with, we take available camel to do our scene with. I understand that. It's not accurate. And so this film is a hodgepodge of that. They are talking about funeral rites, but they absolutely do not mention mummification. I think because they think it's gross. They're not wrong. They're not wrong, but these Egyptian mummified, even in those days, they mummified. They mummified. That's the first thing they did was start mummifying. So there's that. Egyptian culture, when you start to look into it, is gross. Mummification is gross. Some of the practices are gross. The only thing that wasn't gross in Egyptian culture is the fact that women and men had pretty much the same status. And a woman could do the same thing as a man could do. Which is awesome in that way. But Egyptian gross. So I understand why they skipped it. But it is missing. And also because there's a lot of talk of death because of they're building a pyramid for when the pharaoh dies. And he does die at some point. So you have a whole funeral going on. And it's just no mummification. Just skipped it. So sanitized picture book version of history, but not inaccurate. I mean, I've seen way more inaccurate things than this. But you have to know your history, and you have to realize they largely made everything up, and sort of more how this might have gone than it is actual history. I think this is a fascinating movie. I'm not sure that it is a good movie, but I think it's a fascinating movie. And the story is interesting enough to keep me interested. They're trying to skirt between, we want to do an interesting story and we wanted to make it sense in the Egyptian way of thinking. So that's why greed and stuff like that comes up real bad, and poisonings and all those things that you would have read if you read any Wikipedia page on pick any Egyptian Pharaoh from way back when. There are going to be stories of poisonings and incest, and the only thing they didn't do is the incest, because you can skirt around it. But there's a second wife, and there's the first wife had a son, and the second wife doesn't like that, and that sort of infighting. So it gives you the flavor of the ickiness of these Egyptians. And this enormous building 26 years to build a mausoleum, and that still stands today. Which is effing awesome and weird and strange and wow. The acting in this, I think, was a little bit. In 1955, they would do it a little flat, which I think is not bad. It actually goes with this pretty well. You have Jack Hawkins to do the Pharaoh, he's pretty spunky. And then you have Joan Collins to do the girl, and she's plenty spunky. So, yeah, they do a little bit like tipping of little points. There is, in the middle, to impress the ladies, the Pharaoh organizes a bullfight, which is kind of strange because I don't think the Egyptians did that. They did bull sacrifices. But the bullfight really is more of a Greek thing, I think. It's sort of like these little things where you go, yeah, that is something ancient, but is it here? I'm not sure. Could it be? We don't know. It's the 46 centuries ago. We don't know. We don't know. They just filled in what they thought, oh, well, this looks cool and this we can do. So we have Jack Hawkins, or his stunt double, actually tackling a bull, which is also... The film is full of, oh my god, that's awesome. Also, so many extras. I think this is like, it had on the wiki, the film with the most extras, with the Egyptian army showing up at some point, all dressed up, and you know, I'm not sure that it makes it out of the it's kind of okay stage. Mm-hmm. I'm not sorry that I watched it. This I think is the best thing I can say about it. I'm not sorry that I watched it. I actually watched it two times. One time a very long time ago, so I knew it existed, and so I watched it again, and it's okay. It's mostly interesting more than it's good, and that's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it.